Most people in the medieval world died within 10 miles of where they were born. Their entire universe was the field, the church, the village. So what could possibly compel someone to leave it all behind and walk into a world of monsters, mud, and myth? The first light of dawn spills over the thatched roofs of a sleeping village. It's a gentle light, soft and gray. It catches the rising smoke from the baker's oven, a comforting plume that promises the day's bread. Down the lane, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil has already begun, a steady heartbeat for this small, self-contained world. The blacksmith is at his forge. This is a place where every sound, every smell, every face is known. It is a world bounded by the dark line of the woods on one side and the slow, winding river on the other. It is home. If you're settling in for the night, thank you for joining us. If you enjoy these historical explorations, a simple like or subscription helps our small community grow. We love seeing how far these stories travel, so feel free to leave a comment saying where you re-listening from tonight and what time it is for you. It's incredible to think of us all connected, listening to the same story across so many time zones. It's always a wonder to see our community span the globe. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, in Bedtime History, we step out of the familiar and onto the uncertain roads of the Middle Ages. Our journey doesn't begin with a grand departure, but with the reasons why, for most, a journey was never even a consideration. The world of the medieval peasant was a 10-mile universe. This was not a choice, but a fundamental condition of existence, woven into the very fabric of the land and the law. At the heart of this static life was the manor system, a vast and intricate web of obligations that held society together. The lord of the manor owned the land, all of it, the fields, the forests, the river, and the mill, and the people who worked that land, the vast majority of the population, were bound to it in a state known as serfdom. They were not slaves in the classical sense, as they could not be bought and sold individually, but they were profoundly unfree. A serf could not leave the manor without the lord's express permission. To do so was to become a fugitive, a person with no place, no protection, and no name. This was a legal bond, a chain forged not of iron, but of feudal duty. The serf owed the lord a certain number of days of labor each week, working his personal fields, known as the domain. They also owed him a portion of their own harvest, a share of the eggs their chickens laid, a tithe for the church he supported. Their lives were a constant negotiation of these ingrained obligations. This lack of mobility fostered an intense localism. The economy of the village was almost entirely self-sufficient, a closed loop of production and consumption. The wool from the lord's sheep was spun into thread by the village women, then woven into rough cloth. The grain from the fields was ground at the lord's mill, for which a fee was extracted, of course. The blacksmith forged the tools needed to till the soil. Life was a cycle, dictated not by ambition, but by the relentless turning of the agricultural calendar. There was a time for planting and a time for harvesting, a time for plowing and a time for lying fallow. These were the rhythms that governed all of existence, leaving precious little room or energy for the abstract idea of travel. Imagine, for a moment, life inside a wattle landau hut. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke from the central hearth, a scent that clings to every surface. There is another smell to damp earth. The floor is packed dirt, cool and moist underfoot. Through the single small doorway, you can hear the sounds of the village, a cow lowing, the distant, reassuring toll of the parish church bell echoing across the open fields. This bell marked the hours of the day, calling people to prayer, to work, and to rest. The church was the stone-built heart of a wood and mud community. It was the center of social life, the repository of all spiritual belief, and the tallest building anyone had ever seen. Its steeple was the landmark that guided you home from the farthest fields. Inside this small home, darkness is a constant companion. There are no windows, only a small shutter to keep out the worst of the wind and rain. The light from the fire flickers, casting deep shadows that dance on the rough walls. Your clothes are made of coarse, scratchy wool, a constant, abrasive reminder of your station. The food is simple, monotonous, coarse rye bread, dense and heavy, a thin vegetable stew or pottage, and weak ale, often safer to drink than the local water. This was not a life that encouraged dreams of distant lands. It was a life focused on the immediate, on the tangible, on survival. To even consider leaving was to face not just legal repercussions, but a world of terrifying unknowns. The next valley, just a few miles away, could be like a foreign country. It might belong to a different lord, with different rules, different tolls, and a different, often hostile disposition. The simple act of crossing a river could require paying a hefty fee to the local baron who owned the bridge or the ferry. The roads, if they could be called that, were a constant source of anxiety, and the people were different. Over just a few dozen miles, the very language you spoke could shift into a dialect so thick it was nearly incomprehensible. The words and cadences that felt like home would dissolve into a strange and alien music, marking you instantly as an outsider. An outsider was a source of suspicion, a potential thief, a vagrant, someone who did not belong. This fear was reinforced by the stories told around the fire on long winter nights. These were tales passed down through generations, oral maps of a world teeming with danger. The deep woods were not just trees, they were the domain of wolves, boars, and perhaps things far worse. They were home to cunning spirits, mischievous sprites, and malevolent demons. The church itself taught that the world outside the comforting structure of Christendom was a wilderness of sin and temptation, a place where a soul could easily be lost. For the average person who possessed no map, whose knowledge of geography was limited to the paths between their home, the fields, and the church, the world beyond their village was not a landscape of opportunity. It was a terrifying void. Life was also short, with an average expectancy hovering somewhere around 35 years. There was little incentive for long-term planning. Life was a sprint, not a marathon. Childhood was brief, and adulthood was a long struggle against famine, disease, and the endless toil of the land. Why would one spend a precious year of this short life on a perilous journey when there was work to be done, a family to feed, and a lord to serve? The very idea was a luxury few could afford to even contemplate. The physical landscape itself was a formidable barrier. Primeval forests, dense and dark, covered vast swaths of the continent. Swamps and marshes, teeming with insects and disease, could stretch for miles, with no clear path through them. Bridges were rare and often poorly maintained marvels of engineering. To leave the village was to place your faith not in roads, but in muddy tracks, ancient footpaths, and the vague, often unreliable, oral directions of strangers. This was the 10-mile universe, a place of deep roots, profound faith, and an ingrained, understandable fear of the world that lay beyond the horizon. But not everyone was bound to the soil. For some, a call to the road was a whisper they could not ignore. For others, it was a thunderous command. The reasons for undertaking a journey were as varied as the travelers themselves, but they were always powerful. For many, the call was a spiritual one. This was the age of faith, and pilgrimage was a central expression of devotion. A farmer who had survived a harsh winter, a knight who had taken a life in battle, a merchant who had amassed a fortune might feel the need to undertake a journey of penance. They walked to seek forgiveness, to cure an illness, or to simply touch a fragment of the divine. Great shrines beckoned from across the continent. Santiago de Compostela in Spain, the supposed burial place of the Apostle St. James. Rome, the heart of the Church, where one could pray at the tombs of Saints Peter and Paul. And the ultimate destination, Jerusalem, a journey so long and so perilous it was the dream of a lifetime. A pilgrim would carry little, but their identity was marked by a staff, a broad-brimmed hat, and perhaps a simple badge, like the scallop shell of St. James, sewn onto their cloak. This shell was a passport, a sign to others that they were on God's business, deserving of charity and safe passage. For others, the motivation was not divine, but commercial. The high Middle Ages saw the slow reawakening of long-distance trade. Ambitious merchants, often organized into powerful guilds, began to forge new connections between distant lands. They followed ancient routes, like the Via Francigena, which snaked its way from Canterbury all the way to Rome, a path trod by both pilgrims and entrepreneurs. These men dealt in goods that brought color and flavor to a drab world: English wool, Flemish cloth, German salt, and from the distant east, carried overland or by sea, came the luxuries that graced the tables and bodies of the nobility. Spices like pepper and cinnamon, and shimmering silks that felt like water in the hand. The sound of a trade fair was a cacophony of commerce, with merchants haggling in a dozen different languages, their stalls piled high with exotic wares. It was a world of risk, but also of immense profit. These journeys were complex logistical operations, often requiring letters of credit and safe conduct passes, early forms of banking and passports. A merchant's journey was one of calculation and opportunity. War was another powerful engine of movement. A king's call to arms could uproot thousands of men from their homes. Soldiers marched on campaign, a slow-moving river of steel and leather. Knights traveled to tournaments to test their skills and win renown. And then there were the Crusades, vast expeditions that sent armies of the faithful across the known world to reclaim the Holy Land. The logistics of moving and supplying such a force were staggering, a testament to the organizational power of the medieval state, however fragile it might seem to us now. The road for a soldier was one of discipline, danger, and duty. In a world without instant communication, information traveled at the speed of a horse. Royal messengers were a vital part of governance. carrying letters and decrees sealed with the king's wax insignia. A dusty rider on a lathered horse, arriving in a cloud of dust, was a dramatic event, a sign that the wider world was intruding on local affairs. News from Rome might take weeks to reach London or Paris, each rustle of the sealed parchment carrying immense weight. The church itself was a network that spanned all of Europe, and its functionaries were constantly in motion. Bishops traveled between the towns and cathedrals of their dioceses. Itinerant friars, like the Franciscans and Dominicans, rejected the cloistered life of monks and chose to live and preach among the people, walking from village to village with nothing but their faith. Knowledge, too, was a reason to travel. The first great universities were being founded in cities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, drawing students and scholars from hundreds of miles away, all seeking to be part of the intellectual flowering of the age. And at the very top of the social pyramid, royalty was perpetually on the move. The peripatetic court was a practical necessity. A great lord or king could not stay in one place for long, lest his household consume all the resources of the surrounding estate. So the court moved, a vast procession of nobles, servants, clerks, and soldiers, traveling from one castle to another. This was how a ruler enforced authority, dispensed justice, and remained visible to his subjects. Their journey was not a lonely trek, but the movement of a small city. Of course, not all travel was voluntary. A failed harvest could lead to famine, forcing entire families to abandon their homes in a desperate search for food. The outbreak of plague could send people fleeing from the invisible pestilence that stalked the towns, and the ravages of war could displace thousands, turning them into refugees on the roads of their own country. For these unwilling travelers, the journey was not an adventure, but a matter of raw survival. The road was their last, desperate hope. Once the decision was made, whether by choice or by necessity, the journey began not with a step, but with careful, often desperate, preparation. For on the medieval road, what you carried could mean the difference between life and death. The prospective traveler did not have the luxury of a large suitcase. Everything they needed had to be carried on their own back, day after weary day. The essential piece of luggage was the scrip, a small satchel usually made of leather, worn slung over the shoulder. It was just large enough to hold the barest of necessities. Its weight was a constant companion, a physical reminder of one's worldly possessions. This was the traveler's larder, their wallet, and their toolbox, all in one. Equally important was the staff, known as a borden. This was far more than a simple walking stick. It was a third leg on treacherous ground, providing stability on muddy slopes and rocky paths. It could be used to probe the depth of a stream before attempting to ford it, or to push aside thorny brambles. It was also a weapon against the wild dogs that often roamed the countryside, or, in a pinch, against a tool-legged predator. A solid oak staff was a formidable tool for defense. Its smooth, worn surface would become familiar to the traveler's hand, its heft a small measure of security in an insecure world. Clothing was a form of shelter. The most critical garment was a heavy woolen cloak. Wool is a remarkable material. It insulates even when wet and is incredibly durable. During the day, it protected against biting winds and sudden downpours. At night, it became a blanket, providing a small cocoon of warmth against the cold ground. Underneath, a traveler would wear a simple tunic, also likely of wool, and breeches. On their feet, they would have leather shoes, or, if they were fortunate, sturdy boots. Protecting the feet was paramount, as a twisted ankle or a festering blister could bring a journey to a sudden, disastrous end. A hood or a simple coif covered the head, and a broad-brimmed hat, perhaps of felt or straw, was invaluable for shielding the face from the relentless summer sun and the dreary winter rain. Food had to be portable, durable, and energenous. The staple was hardtack, a simple biscuit made from flour, water, and sometimes salt. It was baked twice until it was bone dry and incredibly hard, making it resistant to mold. It was almost tasteless and had to be soaked in water or ale to be edible, but it would last for months. Alongside it, a traveler might carry a chunk of hard cheese or a piece of salted meat or fish wrapped in cloth. Foraging was not a hobby, but an essential skill. Wild berries, nuts, and edible roots could supplement this meager diet. Water was carried in a gourd or a leather water skin, though this was often supplemented with weak ale, as the brewing process killed many of the harmful bacteria found in questionable water sources. Money was a constant source of anxiety. There was no single, unified currency. The silver pennies minted by one lord might not be accepted in the lands of another, or might be valued differently. Coins were precious and had to be protected from the ever-present threat of thieves. A common practice was to sew a few silver pennies into the hem of a tunic, a hidden reserve for emergencies. Wealthier travelers, like merchants, might carry letters of credit from banking houses, such as those run by the Knights Templar, allowing them to draw funds in a distant city without having to carry large amounts of vulnerable cash. Documents were a traveler's proof of purpose. A pilgrim would carry credentials from their home parish, a letter of introduction that vouched for their honest intentions. A messenger would have letters sealed with a noble's crest. A merchant might possess a safe conduct pass, a document issued by a king or lord that theoretically guaranteed protection while traveling through their lands. These pieces of parchment were precious, a shield against suspicion and official harassment. A few small tools were indispensable. A simple knife was the multi-tool of the age, used for cutting food, mending equipment, and as a last-ditch weapon. Flint and steel were necessary to start a fire for warmth, cooking, and to ward off nocturnal predators. Some might carry a small, light cooking pot, and for many, religious items were a source of profound comfort. A string of prayer beads, a rosary, or a small carved wooden cross was a tangible link to the divine, a spiritual compass in the wilderness. There were no maps for the common person. Navigation was an art, not a science. The traveler relied on verbal directions, on following a river downstream, or keeping a particular hill in sight. They navigated by the sun, by the stars, and by the accumulated wisdom of those they met along the way. By the flickering light of a candle, or the dim glow of the hearth, our traveler would carefully pack these few possessions: the heft of the oak staff, the smell of oiled leather and wool, the satisfying clink of the few hidden coins, the rough, dry texture of the hardtack. Each item was chosen with care, a prayer for the long road ahead. With their few possessions secured and farewells made, the traveler faced the final barrier, the threshold of their own home. To cross it was to step into another world. The first day's journey is a shock to the system. The world outside the village is immediately unnervingly different. The familiar sounds of life, the blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of neighbors, the crowing of the rooster fade with every step. They are replaced by a profound quiet, a silence broken only by the whispering wind, the chirping of unseen birds, and the sound of your own breathing and footsteps, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot, the squelch of thick mud sucking at your boots. It is a lonely sound. The road itself is often a fiction. The magnificent paved highways of the Roman Empire were ancient history, their stones often robbed for local buildings, their routes overgrown and lost. What remained was a network of dirt tracks, carved by the passage of countless feet and cartwheels. In the dry heat of summer, these tracks were channels of choking dust that coated the throat and stung the eyes. After a rain, they transformed into quagmires of thick, clinging mud that could pull a shoe from a foot and make every step a monumental effort. Progress is painfully slow. A healthy person on foot, on a good day with fair weather and a decent path, might hope to cover 15 or 20 miles. This was a full day's walk, from sunrise to sunset. This pace, this rhythm of walking, was the fundamental tempo of medieval life. The world moved at the speed of a human stride. Navigation is a constant challenge. There are no signposts. You rely on the landmarks given to you back in the last village. Follow this track until you see the 3 ancient oaks on the hill, then bear towards the river. You follow the sun's arc across the sky. You learn to read the landscape, to recognize the way a path dips towards a hidden stream or rises towards a windswept ridge. The isolation can be overwhelming. As the hours pass, you look back, and the comforting sight of your own village, the smoke rising from its chimneys, shrinks and finally disappears behind a hill. The psychological weight of this moment is immense. The anchor has been lifted. You are truly on your own. Every stranger encountered on the road is a source of immediate and intense calculation. Is this fellow pilgrim a potential companion, someone to share the road and the dangers with? Or is this smiling merchant a decoy for bandits lurking in the woods ahead? Every meeting requires a quick assessment of threat versus opportunity. A shared fire at night could mean safety in numbers, or it could mean waking up to find your meager possessions gone. The legal framework of the road was patchy at best. In England, an ancient custom known as the trinota necessitatis placed the responsibility for maintaining roads and bridges on local landowners, but this duty was often neglected. The concept of the King's Highway existed in theory, a space where travelers were supposed to be under royal protection, but the king's presence was a distant abstraction. On a lonely stretch of forest road, the only law was strength and cunning. Crossing a river is a major obstacle. If you are lucky, you might find a shallow spot, a ford, where you can wade across, hoping the current isn't too strong. More likely, you will have to rely on a ferry, a small, rickety boat operated by a ferryman who will demand a toll. Bridges were rare, often built of stone and considered marvels of engineering. They too were commercial enterprises, and a toll collector would be waiting at the entrance to extract a fee for the privilege of a safe crossing. As the afternoon sun begins to dip towards the horizon, a new anxiety sets in. The setting sun is a strict deadline. To be caught on the road after dark is to invite disaster. The forests, already intimidating by day, become places of unimaginable terror at night. This is the time when wolves and other, less natural, predators are on the prowl. The day's goal shifts from making distance to simply finding a safe place to rest. The physical toll of that first day is severe. Muscles unused to such constant punishing work begin to ache. A dull pain settles in the shoulders from the weight of the scrip. The feet, encased in leather, are sore and tender. The first day ends not with a feeling of triumph, but with aching limbs, profound loneliness, and a growing apprehension of the night to come. As darkness falls, the trees become menacing shapes, and every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, sounds like a threat. The chilling howl of a distant wolf slices through the twilight air, a stark reminder that you have left the world of humanity and entered the realm of the wild. The challenge has shifted from making progress to simply surviving the night. As our traveler looks for a place to rest, perhaps you are doing the same. What's the longest journey you've ever taken on foot? Let the memories of that walk guide you into peaceful thoughts as our story continues. The first day on the road is a baptism of hardship, but the second day, and the third, and the 10th bring a different kind of challenge. The initial shock gives way to a grinding, relentless reality, a new kind of tyranny that has nothing to do with lords or kings. It is the tyranny of the road itself. The very ground beneath our travelers' feet is an adversary. Not all roads were created equal. Some were the ghosts of the Roman Empire, long, straight tracks paved with massive stones. But centuries of neglect had taken their toll. The stones were often broken, or missing entirely, plundered for building a new church or a castle wall. They were uneven and treacherous, a trap for a twisted ankle. Other paths were drove roads, wide, grassy avenues used for moving livestock. These were churned to a muddy pulp by the passage of 1,000 hooves, making each step a laborious pull against the clinging earth. And then there were the holloways. These were ancient paths worn down over centuries by the passage of feet, hooves, and wheels until they sank deep into the landscape. To walk in a holloway was to be in a sunken trench with high earthen banks on either side. It offered some shelter from the wind, but it was also claustrophobic, and in the rain it became a channel for torrents of muddy water. The grating sound of a cartwheel grinding against a stone in one of these channels was a sound of pure, monotonous effort, a sound that etched itself into the mind. This constant friction had a direct consequence for the traveler's most vital piece of equipment, their shoes. Leather soles wore down with alarming speed on the rough tracks. A loose stitch, a hole worn through, was not a minor inconvenience. It was a crisis. Every town of any size would have a cobbler, a craftsman who could patch and mend worn footwear. Finding one was a moment of profound relief. To sit and watch him work his awl and thread was to watch a lifeline being repaired. More than bandits, more than wolves, the greatest killers on the road were exhaustion and exposure. The elements were a constant foe. On a summer's day, the sun beat down relentlessly. The road shimmered with heat, and the air was thick with the smell of hot dust. There was nowhere to hide from its glare, and sunstroke was a constant danger, bringing with it a pounding headache, dizziness, and a debilitating weakness. The dust kicked up by a passing horse or a cart was a gritty torment, getting into the eyes, the nose, the mouth, until everything you ate tasted of dirt. Conversely, a sudden downpour could be just as dangerous. A woolen cloak, heavy to begin with, became a leaden weight when soaked through. The chilling feel of the damp fabric against the skin was a promise of a deeper cold, a cold that could seep into the bones and lead to hypothermia, even on a cool summer evening. To see a river ahead, swollen and brown with rainwater, its current fast and angry, was to know that the ford you were counting on was now impassable. You would have to wait, perhaps for days, or risk being swept away. For this reason, travel was a seasonal affair. Winter was the worst time. The days were short, the nights long and brutally cold. The roads, frozen solid, were slick with ice, and a fall could mean a broken bone, a certain death sentence for a lone traveler. When the thaw came, those same roads dissolved into impassable seas of mud. The best time for a journey was the spring, when the world was coming back to life, or the early autumn, after the harvest was in and the weather was still mild. For those traveling with goods, the pace was even slower. A loaded wagon, pulled by a team of weary oxen, might only make 10 miles on a good day. The constant fear was of a broken axle, the jarring lurch, the sickening crack of wood, the slow, grinding halt. This was a disaster. It meant unpacking the entire cart, finding a carpenter, and losing precious days, all while being a stationary target for any thief who happened by. Because of this, many merchants preferred to transport their goods by water. Rivers were the highways of the medieval world. A barge could carry 100 times the cargo of a wagon. But even this had its challenges. Traveling downstream was easy enough, but moving against the current was an arduous task, requiring teams of men to tow the boat from the riverbank with long ropes. Day after day of this slow, relentless progress took its toll on the body and the mind. The physical ailments were legion. Blisters, raw and weeping, turned every step into an agony. The monotony of the landscapeth, same fields, the same woods, the same low hills could crush the spirit. It was a walking meditation in a world of green and brown, a psychological test of endurance. And with every sip of water from a stream, there was the gamble. Was it clean? Or did it carry the invisible seeds of dysentery, a sickness that could drain the life from a person in a matter of days? At times, when the woods fell away and the land opened up into a vast, featureless plain, the traveler had only the sky to guide them. They learned to read the sun's position, to tell the time and the direction. At night, they looked for the pole star. They measured their progress, not in miles, but in a more human metric, the day's journey. The distance between two towns was not 20 leagues, but 3 days' walk. And at every stage, at every bridge, at every town gate, at every mountain pass, another hand was out, demanding a toll. A penny here, a halfpenny there. It was a constant, draining expense. A reminder that even the road itself belonged to someone else. The day's end was a moment of almost spiritual release. To finally sit, to unlace the stiff leather boots, and to feel the blood rush back into your aching feet was a pleasure so intense it bordered on ecstasy. The road was a harsh master. It demanded everything and gave back only the miles you had earned with your own sweat and pain. Day after day, the road took its toll. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a new and more urgent anxiety took hold, the search for shelter. To be caught out in the open after dark was to be utterly vulnerable. And so, as evening approached, the traveler's eyes would scan the horizon for a sign of hope. The most welcome sight in the world was a thin plume of smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. It was a promise of warmth, of food, of a roof over one's head. But what kind of roof would it be? The options for a night's rest were few, and they varied wildly in quality. For the pilgrim, or indeed for any traveler, the best hope was to reach a monastery before the gates were closed for the night. Hospitality to strangers was a sacred duty for monks, an explicit instruction in the rule of Saint Benedict, which stated, Let all guests who arrive be received like Christ. At the monastery gatehouse, a traveler would be met by the guestmaster or hospitaller, a monk whose specific role was to care for visitors. Inside the monastery walls, one found a world of peaceful order. The traveler would be given water to wash their feet, a simple but wholesome meal, and a clean, if Spartan, place to sleep, often in a dedicated guest house. There was no charge for this charity, though a donation was always welcome. To lie down in a simple cell and hear the distant, peaceful sound of the monks chanting vespers was to feel a profound sense of safety and sanctity. It was a sanctuary from the chaos of the road. Far more common, however, was the roadside inn, and here one must make a distinction. A tavern, or an alehouse, was primarily a place to drink. An inn, on the other hand, offered food and, crucially, lodging. But the quality of that lodging was often abysmal. The heart of the inn was the main room, a cavernous space dominated by a large, smoky hearth. The air was thick with the smell of stale ale, sweat, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. Here, around the fire, a chaotic cross-section of society would gather. The sound was a constant hubbub of loud storytelling, arguments, and the clatter of dice games on wooden tables. When it came time to sleep, there was little hope of privacy. Travelers were packed into communal dormitories, sometimes sleeping a dozen or more to a room. The beds themselves were little more than wooden frames stuffed with straw mattresses, and these mattresses were ecosystems unto themselves, crawling with fleas, lice, and other vermin. The feel of the lumpy, flea-infested straw was a torment for anyone used to a proper bed. Worse still, you would almost certainly have to share your bed, often with complete strangers. You would lie down next to a snoring merchant on one side and a coughing carter on the other, clutching your money pouch close and hoping for the best. The food served at an inn was as questionable as the bedding. The centerpiece of the kitchen was often a large cauldron containing the pottage, a perpetual stew. Each day, new ingredients, whatever vegetables, grains, or scraps of meat were available, were added to what was left over from the day before. The pot was never fully emptied, while a hot, savory pottage could taste like a feast after a long, cold day. One tried not to think too hard about the age or origin of the meat floating in it. Yet, for all their squalor and danger, inns were vital hubs of communication. It was here that you could learn the news of the kingdom, hear gossip from a distant city, or make a business deal. It was here you could get information about the road ahead. But the dangers were real. Theft was rampant. A moment of carelessness could mean losing everything. Drunken brawls could erupt in an instant, with fists and knives flashing in the firelight. And the innkeeper himself was often a figure of suspicion, known for watering down the ale, overcharging for fodder, and colluding with local thieves. A few pence would buy you a spot on a mattress and a bowl of stew, but a peaceful night's sleep was never guaranteed. For the poorest travelers, even the squalor of an inn was an unaffordable luxury. They might seek shelter in the stable, burrowing into the hay for warmth, alongside the horses and oxen. It was a step above sleeping outdoors, but only just. For those with no other option, a night was spent sub divo, under the open sky. This was the last resort. It meant finding a sheltered spot, a hollow or a thicket of trees, and wrapping oneself in a cloak, praying it didn't rain. The risks were immense, from the bitter cold, from wild animals, and from any person who might stumble upon a sleeping, defenseless victim. Along major pilgrimage routes, a better option existed. Hospices were established by religious orders, like the Knights Hospitaller, specifically to care for poor pilgrims or the sick. These were places of genuine charity, offering basic food and shelter without expectation of payment. The evening, whether spent in a monastery, an inn, or by the side of the road, was a time for vital chores. It was a time to tend to blisters, to mend a tear in a cloak, to check the straps on your scrip, and to plan the route for the coming day. It was a brief, uncertain respite from the tyranny of the road. If a traveler found a roof for the night, they were safe from the elements. But the greatest fears often came not from the sky, but from the shadows between the trees. The medieval forest was more than just a collection of trees. It was a separate world, a realm of both natural danger and supernatural dread. In the popular imagination, and often in reality, the forest was a place outside the law. It was where the authority of the king and the local lord began to fray and dissolve. And into this vacuum stepped other, more dangerous powers. The most immediate human threat was that of outlaws and bandits. While the romantic image of the highwayman belongs to a later era, the medieval woods were certainly home to desperate and dangerous people. These were not usually noble figures like Robin Hood stealing from the rich to give to the poor. That legend was more a reflection of social tensions and a longing for justice than a reality. The real bandits were often starving peasants who had fled their land, or former soldiers who knew no other trade than violence. They would lie in wait in the dense woods that pressed close to the road, ready to ambush a small group or a lone traveler. The sudden snap of a twig in the silent woods could send a jolt of pure adrenaline through a traveler's body. To combat this, laws were sometimes enacted that required lords to clear the land for a certain distance on either side of a major road, perhaps 200 feet. This created a wide open space, denying bandits the element of surprise. But on most minor tracks, the forest pressed in close, its deep shadows a perfect cover for an ambush. In these places, every traveler was possessed by the unsettling feeling of being watched. The animal threats were just as real. Wolves were a pervasive and deeply feared menace, especially in the harshness of winter when their usual prey was scarce. The howl of a wolf pack, closer than you'd like, was a sound that could freeze the blood. Lords and kings often placed bounties on them, a testament to how seriously the threat was taken. Just as dangerous, if not more so for a traveler on foot, were wild boars. These were not the placid pigs of the farmyard. They were large, powerful, and notoriously aggressive, with sharp tusks that could easily disembowel a person. The forest was also a jealously guarded resource for the nobility. Vast tracts of woodland were designated as royal or noble hunting grounds. To be found within their boundaries could be considered trespassing. To actually hunt for food, to kill a deer or even a rabbit, was the crime of poaching, and it was punished with extreme severity. A traveler, starving and lost, might be forced to choose between the law and survival. Beyond these tangible dangers lay a world of supernatural terror. The medieval mind was steeped in a belief system that populated the wild places with a host of non-human entities. The deep, ancient woods were the home of fairies and goblins. These were not the whimsical creatures of later folklore. They were powerful, capricious, and often malevolent beings who might lead a traveler astray with enchanting lights, or steal a child, leaving a changeling in its place. There were tales of the woodwoes, the wild man of the woods, a hairy, club-wielding figure who embodied the savagery of nature. the eerie shapes of trees in the twilight, with their twisted branches resembling grasping arms, could icily fuel a terrified imagination. To protect themselves from these threats, both seen and unseen, people relied on faith and superstition. They would carry protective charms and amulets. They would whisper prayers to Saint Christopher, the patron saint of travelers, or Saint Giles, the protector against the fear of the night. The psychological impact of walking for hours through a dark, silent, ancient woodland was immense. The sunlight, barely penetrating the thick canopy, dappled the floor with shifting, confusing patterns. The air was heavy with the earthy smell of pine needles and damp moss. It was easy to become disoriented, to lose the path. In these vast, unmapped forests, one wrong turn could mean being lost forever. The wisest course of action, when faced with a notoriously dangerous stretch of road or a deep forest, was not to brave it alone. It was to wait for other people. Fear, like the road itself, was a constant companion. The only antidote was other people. And so, the wise traveler sought not just a roof for the night, but company for the day. There was a simple adage that governed the logic of the road. To men's strength is worth more than one's. Traveling alone was an act of either supreme confidence or utter desperation. The smart traveler, the one who intended to reach their destination, sought safety in numbers. At major crossroads, at the gates of a large town, or in the common room of a busy inn, disparate groups of people would coalesce into temporary, fragile communities. A lone pilgrim might wait for a merchant's caravan to form. A student heading to university might join a group of soldiers traveling in the same direction. These ad hoc groups were a fascinating mix of medieval society, a real-life version of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. A well-armed knight might find himself walking alongside a humble miller. A worldly merchant, his pack mules laden with valuable cloth, might share the path with a penniless friar. On the road, the rigid social hierarchies of settled life could sometimes blur, replaced by a more practical order based on experience and capability. A captain might be chosen for a large caravan, a seasoned traveler who knew the route and could make decisions for the group. The journey was long, and the primary form of entertainment was conversation. The sound of many footsteps and voices became a comforting shield against the oppressive silence of the wild. People shared stories from their hometowns, exchanged gossip, and passed on vital news. This was the medieval information highway, a network of oral communication that flowed along the trade and pilgrimage routes. Around a shared campfire at night, with faces illuminated by the flickering flames, a unique kind of community was forged. The smell of food cooking over the open fire, the communal act of singing songs or reciting prayers to pass the time, these simple things created a bond. People shared their meager provisions. The taste of shared bread and wine was a simple communion on the road, a gesture of trust in a dangerous world. But this trust was always fragile. The central tension of group travel was the conflict between companionship and suspicion. The person walking beside you was your best defense against a bandit in the woods. But were they also a thief, simply waiting for you to fall asleep to rifle through your scrip? Every member of the group was constantly, subtly assessing the others. Alliances would form, and outsiders would be watched with caution. Yet the practical benefits usually outweighed the risks. Traveling in a group made everyone a harder target for outlaws. It also allowed for the sharing of costs. A ferryman's fee, or the price of a room at an inn, could be split among many, lessening the burden on each individual. For a group of pilgrims, the bond was often stronger, forged by a shared spiritual purpose. They were all walking towards the same sacred goal, and this common quest created a sense of solidarity that transcended social class. They would support each other, tending to the sick and encouraging the weary. They were, for a time, a single body moving toward God. Perhaps the most valuable currency exchanged on the road was information. Travelers moving in the opposite direction would bring priceless intelligence: which roads were safest, which bridges had been washed out, which innkeeper was honest, and which one was a cheat. This constant exchange of knowledge was critical for survival. To be a part of a group was to be tapped into this life-saving flow of information. To be alone was to be deaf and blind to the road's immediate dangers. For weeks, perhaps months, the road was their world. A world of aching feet, shared stories, constant vigilance, and small, profound moments of connection with strangers. But eventually, for the lucky ones, the hardships began to give way to new sights and sounds, the undeniable signs that they were approaching their destination. Traveling with others has always been part of the human story. Think of a memorable conversation you once had with a stranger on a journey. Let that feeling of connection soothe you as we travel onward. For weeks, even months, the road has been the entire world. A monotonous ribbon of mud and dust, punctuated by fear and fatigue. But then, one afternoon, something changes. A fellow traveler, coming from the direction you are headed, says the city is only another day's journey. A current of excitement passes through the group. The pace quickens. The weariness in your bones is replaced by a thrum of anticipation. And then you see it. At first, it is just a glint on the horizon, a flash of light where there should only be sky. You strain your eyes, thinking it a trick of the sun. But as you walk on, the glint resolves itself into a shape, a point of stone, impossibly high, catching the morning sun. It is the spire of a great cathedral. Soon, more shapes appear alongside it. The solid, crenellated tops of castle towers, the steep roofs of countless buildings, all contained within the dark, formidable line of a massive wall. After the endless, horizontal landscape of the countryside, this vertical thrust of civilization is a breathtaking sight. It is a man-made mountain range, a declaration of power and faith etched against the sky. The landscape itself begins to transform. The dense, wild forests give way to managed woodlands. The small, scattered fields of villages are replaced by a vast, organized patchwork of farmland, feeding the great stone beast on the horizon. You see windmills, their sails turning slowly in the breeze, a piece of technology that seems miraculous. The road becomes wider, more defined, and better maintained. The flow of traffic increases. You are no longer alone, but part of a steady stream of humanity being drawn towards the city gates. Before you reach the walls, you must pass through the suburbs, the faubourgs. This is where the city keeps its messiest and smelliest work at arm's length. Here are the tanneries, with their pits of urine and animal skins, releasing a stench so powerful it makes your eyes water. Here are the butcheries, the ground slick with blood and offal. The air is thick with smoke from forges and kilns. It is a chaotic, sprawling prelude to the city proper, a place of industry and grime. And here, too, you might see a grim warning. Outside the city walls, on a small hill stand, the gallows perhaps with a body or two still, hanging in a gibbet, a stark and silent message to all who approach. This city has laws, and it enforces them without mercy. Finally, you stand before the gate. It is a colossal structure of stone and wood, a dark maw in the side of the impossibly high walls. It is a place of control. Armed guards eye you with suspicion, their job to keep out vagrants, beggars, and other undesirables. Everyone who enters must pay a toll, a tax called a murage, which helps to fund the maintenance of the very walls that protect the city. You fumble for a penny, feeling the guard's impatient gaze upon you. The transition is abrupt and overwhelming. The moment you step through the deep, shadowy arch of the gateway, you leave the world of the road behind and enter a new dimension of human experience. The sound hits you first. It is a physical wave, a roar composed of 1,000 different noises. Church bells ring out from a dozen different steeples all at once. Merchants cry out their wares in a dozen different languages. Hammers clang in blacksmith shops. Dogs bark. Children shout. The overwhelming sound of countless conversations, a dense tapestry of human voices, fills the air. After the relative silence of the countryside, the sheer volume is dizzying. Then comes the smell. It is an assault on the senses, a powerful and complex mix of everything a medieval city produces. There is the warm, comforting scent of baking bread from a nearby oven, but it is mixed with the sharp tang of wood smoke, the sweetness of rotting vegetables thrown into the street, and the ever-present acrid stench of the city's open drains. The smell of livestock, pigs, chickens, horses is everywhere, as is the clothes. Musky scent of thousands of unwashed human beings packed together in tight quarters, and the people. After weeks of seeing only a handful of faces each day, you are suddenly immersed in a sea of humanity. The narrow streets are thronged, a dense river of bodies. You are jostled and pushed, your sense of personal space completely erased. The sights are as overwhelming as the sounds and smells. The buildings are tall, timber-framed structures that lean out over the street, their upper floors almost touching, blocking out the sun. Banners and brightly painted signs hang from shops, advertising their wares, with pictures for the illiterate masses. You see goods piled high in market stalls that you have only ever heard of in stories. Shimmering silks from the east, barrels of wine from the south, and spices that release an exotic perfume into the already thick air. The sheer variety is intoxicating. You buy a hot meat pie from a street vendor, the flaky crust burning your fingers. After weeks of dry bread and salted meat, the taste of the savory filling is an unimaginable luxury, a small, perfect reward for having finally arrived. Having passed through the gates, the traveler was now immersed in a new world, a labyrinth of stone and timber. Here, at the end of their long road, lay the object of their quest. For each traveler, the city holds a different prize. For the pilgrim, the entire city is but a prelude to one sacred space. They navigate the confusing streets, asking for directions, until they stand before the great cathedral. The sheer scale of the building is meant to humble the visitor, to make them feel small in the presence of God. Passing through the heavy doors, they step out of the noisy street and into a cavern of cool, echoing silence. The air is heavy with the smell of melting wax candles and centuries of old incense. High above, sunlight filters through vast stained glass windows, painting the stone floor with jewels of blue, red, and gold. The echoing sound of a choir practicing in a distant chapel seems to be the voice of angels. The pilgrim moves slowly in a state of reverent awe. Their goal is the shrine at the heart of the church, where the relics of a saint are housed in a magnificent casket of gold and silver. Here they finally kneel. The feel of the cool, ancient stone beneath their weary hands and knees is the final physical confirmation of their arrival. They pray, pouring out the hopes and fears they have carried for hundreds of miles. They have fulfilled their vow. They have reached the holy place. Before they leave, they purchase a small lead badge, an ampulla, or perhaps a scallop shell, a simple token that proves to the world they completed their journey. It is a moment of profound spiritual cleansing, a catharsis that makes every hardship of the road worthwhile. For the merchant, the goal is not a church, but the bustling heart of a great trade fair, perhaps one of the famous fairs of Champagne. Here, the world's commerce is concentrated into one chaotic, exhilarating space. The merchant sets up their stall in a hall, a grand building that serves as a headquarters and social club for traders of a particular nation or craft. They unroll their bolts of fine Flemish wool, their eyes sharp, ready for the complex dance of negotiation. Business is conducted with a new sophistication. They might use double-entry bookkeeping to track their profits and losses, and letters of credit to transfer vast sums without the risk of carrying coin. All around them is a spectacle of global trade. The rustle of silk from distant Cathay, the glint of Baltic amber, the rich scent of spices from the Indies, the soft texture of furs from the cold north. For the merchant, success here means a fortune, a prize that will elevate their family's status for generations. For the young scholar, the destination is a university. They find their way to the lecture halls, which are often just cold, rented rooms. They listen intently as a master, a man of great learning, reads from a rare and precious manuscript, expounding on Aristotle or the scriptures in the universal language of scholarship, Latin. The air itself seems charged with intellectual excitement. The scholar witnesses, and perhaps even participates in a scholastic debate, a rigorous intellectual exercise where arguments are built and dismantled with breathtaking logical precision. They find lodging in a college, a communal house for students, and spend their nights studying by candlelight, their mind fired by the new ideas they have encountered. Their prize is knowledge, a key that unlocks the wisdom of the ages. And for the king's messenger, the journey ends at the gates of a castle or a bishop's palace. After days of hard riding, their duty comes down to a single moment. They are granted an audience. They kneel before the great Lord, break the seal on the leather pouch, and deliver the message they have guarded with their life. Their reward is the quiet relief of a duty completed, a mission accomplished. Now they must simply wait, resting their weary body until a reply is written and sealed, and they must turn around to begin the perilous journey all over again. In the city, all of these travelers discover a new way of life. They marvel at technologies they have never seen, like a massive, intricate mechanical clock on the cathedral tower, marking the hours for all to see. They learn to watch their purse, for the city is full of skilled cut-purses and confidence tricksters who prey on naive newcomers, and they experience the strange freedom of anonymity. In a crowd of thousands, no one knows their name or their history. After a lifetime in a small village, this can be both liberating and terrifying. Their quest is complete. Their prize is won. They have reached the destination. But the prize, once won, did not mark the end. For every outward journey, there must be a return. And the road home held its own unique and subtle challenges. The journey home is a different kind of pilgrimage. The psychological landscape has shifted entirely. The intense, forward-looking focus on a distant goal is gone, replaced by a deep, pervasive longing for the familiar. The destination is no longer a shining cathedral or a bustling market, but the simple, profound comfort of home. This change in perspective colors every step, every sunrise, every weary mile. The excitement of the new has been replaced by the monotony of the known. Retracing one's steps is an exercise in anticlimax. The forest that seemed so menacing on the way out is now just a tedious obstacle. The river that was a formidable challenge is now just another toll to be paid. A deep and profound road weariness can set in, a fatigue that is as much of the spirit as it is of the body. The traveler might be tempted to take a different route home, a shortcut perhaps, just for the sake of novelty. But this brings new risks, new uncertainties, on a road where the known dangers are already enough to handle. Resources, once carefully rationed, are now dangerously low. The money pouch, which seemed so full at the start, has been depleted by weeks of tolls, food, and lodging. The last few crumbs of hard bread are tasted with a sense of rising anxiety. The traveler's gear, once new and sturdy, is now worn and patched. The leather of their boots feels thinner, the sole threatening to give way at any moment. The risk of destitution, of being stranded with nothing, is a constant, gnawing fear. And the dangers of the road have subtly changed. On the outward journey, the traveler was just one among many. Now they are a person returning from a successful venture. The pilgrim, with their newly acquired badge, might be seen by a thief as someone who has fulfilled their holy vow and is now spiritually complacent, an easy target. The merchant, their cart now laden with valuable goods purchased at the fair, is at their most vulnerable. They are no longer a hopeful entrepreneur, but a moving treasure chest. There is a new burden to carry as well. The pilgrim has their souvenirs, the lead badges and ampulla, that now seem to weigh them down. The merchant has their cargo, a source of constant worry. These prizes, once so desired, now become simple, heavy objects that must be guarded and hauled every weary step of the way. As the days turn into weeks, the traveler begins to re-enter familiar territory. They see a hill they recognize, or a river they crossed on the way out. The sight of a landscape seen from the opposite direction is a strange and bittersweet experience. It is a sign of progress, a comfort, but it also serves as a reminder of just how far there is still to go. The sound of one's own thoughts becomes the primary companion on long, lonely stretches of road. And in those thoughts, new anxieties begin to grow. What has happened at home in their long absence? Has there been a sickness, a fire, a failed harvest? In a world without communication, to be away was to be in a void of information. They might even fear being forgotten, of returning to a life that has moved on without them. The longing for simple comforts becomes an obsession. They dream of the taste of a specific meal, the one their wife or mother makes. They fantasize about the overwhelming comfort of their own bed, a bed that doesn't itch with fleas and isn't shared with strangers. The ache of homesickness is a physical pain, a weight in the chest that grows heavier with each passing day. Often, the journey home coincides with the changing of the seasons. The crisp air and golden light of autumn are beautiful, but they are also a warning. The first autumn rains begin to fall, turning the roads back to mud, and the nights grow colder. Winter is coming. The race is on to get home before the roads become impassable. The traveler's most valuable possession is no longer their pilgrim's badge or their money. It is the stories and experiences they now carry inside them, a treasure that cannot be stolen. And then, one day, a familiar shape appears on the horizon. Not a great cathedral, but a simple village church spire, a crooked tree, a low stone wall. Home. The final few miles are walked in a daze of relief and disbelief. The sounds and smells of the village, once the entirety of the world, rush back like a flood. The traveler who left months, perhaps even a year ago, is finally back. Their return is a major event. The first person to spot them lets out a cry, and soon the whole village is pouring out of their small homes. There are shouts of joy, tears of relief. They are surrounded by familiar faces, faces that look both the same and yet subtly different, aged by a season of worry. In that moment, the traveler is the center of the universe. They are a source of wonder, a living link to the vast world beyond the village boundaries. They are peppered with questions. What was the city like? Did you see the king? Is it true that the sea is endless? That night, and for many nights to come, they are the storyteller at the hearth, the firelight dancing on the eager faces of their neighbors. They tell of the dangers of the road, of the splendor of the cathedral, of the strange customs of people in distant lands. They introduce new stories of saints, new knowledge of markets, new ideas that subtly begin to stretch the confines of the 10-mile universe. But they are not the same person who left. The journey has marked them, inside and out. Their skin is weathered and darkened by the sun and wind. They are leaner, tougher. There may be new scars, physical reminders of the road's hardships. Their family notices a change in their eyes, a new depth, a different way of seeing the world. Having seen a great city, the village now seems impossibly small and quiet. The slow, unchanging rhythm of the agricultural year, once the only life they knew, can feel restrictive. They have to readjust, to find their place again in a society that remained static while they were in constant motion. Their new status can be a complex thing. As a returned pilgrim, they carry an aura of holiness. They proudly display their badge, proof of their devotion, and are treated with a new respect. The successful merchant commands a new economic power. But this can also breed jealousy and suspicion. Their stories might be dismissed as fanciful lies. Their newfound worldliness might be seen as arrogance. They feel at once perfectly at home, and in some small way, a stranger. The smell of their own cooking fire, the sound of their own language spoken without a foreign accent, the overwhelming comfort of their own bed, these are sensations of profound homecoming. Yet, a part of them is forever on the road, forever changed by what they have seen and survived. They have brought a piece of the great world back with them, and in doing so, have become a little larger than the world they left behind. The journey is over. The roads, the inns, the dangers, and the wonders now exist only in memory and in the stories that will be told and retold. The traveler is home, forever changed by the world they dared to see, bringing a piece of that world back to the small place they started from. The great adventure recedes into the quiet rhythm of familiar life. As our traveler finds their final rest, I hope you are also feeling settled and at peace. If you're still with me, thank you for journeying this far. There's no need to comment now. Just let your mind drift. More gentle history awaits if you need it. Our traveler is home. The dust of the road has been washed away. The worn-out boots have been set aside. The journey, with all its triumphs and terrors, now exists only as a story, a memory that will soften and change with each telling. The personal adventure is complete, but the road itself continues on, evolving slowly, imperceptibly, through the grand sweep of history. And so, as our story draws to a peaceful close, we step back from the individual path and look at the changing map of the world itself, exploring the gentle currents that carried the medieval age toward the shores of the modern. Our traveler navigated by the sun, by the stars, and by the shape of a familiar hill. They almost certainly never saw a map. In the Middle Ages, a map was not a tool for finding one's way, but for understanding one's place in the cosmos. For the medieval scholar, the world was not a set of coordinates, but a divine story, and their maps reflected this profound belief. Imagine a monk in the quiet scriptorium of a monastery. The only sound is the quiet scratch of a quill pen on vellum. The air smells of old parchment, ink, and beeswax. He is not drawing a map for a traveler. He is creating a diagram of God's plan. The result is what we now call a two-map, or orbis terrarum, the circle of the lands. The map is round, and O, representing the world, which is surrounded by a great, unifying ocean. Inside this circle is a T, which divides the world into its 3 known continents. The upper half is Asia, the largest and most important. The lower left quadrant is Europe, and the lower right is Africa. The vertical line of the T is the Mediterranean Sea. The horizontal line is formed by the Don and the Nile rivers, and at the very center, the nexus of the T, the navel of the world, is Jerusalem. This was a map of theology, a conceptual feeling of a world centered on faith. The grandest surviving example of this worldview is the Hereford Mappa Mundi, a vast and wondrous creation painted on a single enormous sheet of calfskin. To look upon it is to see the medieval mind laid bare. Jerusalem is at its heart. At the very top, in the east, is the Garden of Eden, depicted as a walled island, a paradise lost to humankind. Biblical events are scattered across the landscape as if they are present-day locations. You can see Noah's Ark resting on Mount Ararat, the Tower of Babel, and the pillar of salt that was once Lot's wife. But the map is also populated by the wonders and fears that lurked in the unknown. In the distant lands of Africa and Asia, the monk has painted the monstrous races described by ancient writers. The Blemmyes men with no heads and faces in their chests. The Cyapods who had a single giant foot they used to shade themselves from the sun. And countless other strange creatures, their intricate forms painted in the margins. This was not a document for getting from one place to another. It was a visual encyclopedia of everything that was known and believed about the world, a sermon in ink and vellum. For the practical traveler, something far more straightforward was needed. What existed were not maps, but itineraries. Imagine a long scroll of parchment designed to be unrolled as you journey. This is the kind of guide created by the English monk Matthew Paris in the 13th century for pilgrims heading to Rome. It is not a map in our sense. It is a simple, text-based list of towns, one after the other, a straight line representing the road. Beside each town is a little drawing of a building and a note of the distance to the next stop, measured in days of travel. It is a tool born of experience, a direct representation of the linear, step-by-step nature of a medieval journey. But down in the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, a revolution was quietly taking place. Sailors, whose lives and livelihoods depended on accurate navigation, were creating an entirely new kind of map, the Portolan chart. These charts were breathtakingly different, based on direct observation and the use of the magnetic compass. They depicted the coastlines of the Mediterranean and Black Seas with an accuracy that is shocking to the modern eye. They were not concerned with theology or monsters. They were concerned with coastlines, harbors, and sailing directions. The charts were covered in a spider web of fine lines, rum lines, radiating from compass roses. A captain could use these lines to plot a course from one port to another with a new and startling precision. To see one of these for the first time, after a lifetime of abstract, symbolic maps, must have been an awe-inspiring experience. It was the world not as a story, but as a place. Even these practical masterpieces were part of a wider world of knowledge. In the great scholarly centers of the Arab world, cartography had never lost the mathematical rigor of the classical age. Geographers like al-Idrisi, working at the court of King Roger II of Sicily, combined reports from travelers with ancient knowledge to create maps of the world that were far more advanced and recognizable than anything being produced in most of Northern Europe. Still, for centuries, the traveler's map remained in their head. It was a mental chart built from the stories told by other travelers, from the list of landmarks recited by a friendly innkeeper, and from the deep personal knowledge of the road itself. Most educated people knew the world was a sphere. The idea of a flat earth is largely a modern myth about the Middle Ages, but this knowledge was abstract. The real world was the path beneath their feet. The maps of monks and kings were rare, precious objects, a world away from the common person. It was only in the 15th century, when the lost geography of the ancient scholar Ptolemy was rediscovered and translated, that the principles of latitude, longitude, and mathematical projection were reintroduced to Europe. This was the moment that set the stage for the age of exploration the beginning of a slow, gradual process of filling in those parts of the map that had once simply said, "Here be dragons." As the maps slowly became more true to the land, so too did the roads and shelters upon that land begin to change. The traveler's search for shelter, once a desperate nightly quest, gradually became a more predictable affair. The great engine of this change was commerce. As trade routes became more established and the flow of merchants increased, the old system of relying on the charity of monasteries began to prove insufficient. A new kind of traveler was on the road, one who had money and was willing to pay for a degree of comfort and security. And so, the commercial inn began to rise in prominence. This was a slow evolution. At first, inns were little different from the alehouses we have already encountered. But as demand grew, a process of professionalization began. In towns and cities, innkeepers formed their own guilds, much like other craftsmen. These guilds brought a new sense of order to a chaotic trade. They set standards for the quality of food and ale. They regulated prices, preventing the most egregious forms of gouging. And they helped to ensure that the bedding was at least somewhat clean and the premises were reasonably secure. The inn was becoming a reliable business. A key innovation was the development of extensive stabling. The more sophisticated inns became coaching stops, places where a traveler could not only rest for the night, but also trade their tired horse for a fresh one. This was the beginning of the posting system, a network of inns that allowed for a dramatic increase in the speed of travel, at least for messengers and wealthy individuals who could afford the constant change of mounts. You could hear the sound of the blacksmith's hammer from dawn till dusk at these establishments, a constant rhythm of shoeing horses, a sound of perpetual motion. Some of these inns became famous landmarks in their own right. The Tabard in Southwark, just outside London, was immortalized by Geoffrey Chaucer as the starting point for his Canterbury pilgrims. It was a well-known, reputable establishment, the kind of place a diverse group of strangers would choose to gather before setting out on a long journey together. Its painted sign, swinging gently in the breeze, was an early form of branding, a recognizable symbol for travelers who could not read, a promise of a warm fire and a safe bed. This new organization was not limited to hospitality. The great merchant guilds began to manage the logistics of travel itself. Powerful consortiums, like the Hanseatic League that dominated the trade of the Baltic and North Seas, organized vast merchant caravans. Traveling in such a group offered immense protection. The sight of 100 armed guards accompanying a train of wagons was a powerful deterrent to any would-be robber. The guilds also maintained warehouses and offices in distant cities, creating a network of support for their members. The organized bustle of a guild-managed warehouse with clerks tallying goods and workers loading carts, was a world away from the lonely, vulnerable journey of an individual merchant a few centuries earlier. Even the infrastructure of the road itself began to see slow improvements. The building and maintenance of a bridge was often seen as an act of piety, a good work that would benefit one's soul. Religious fraternities were sometimes formed for the sole purpose of maintaining a crucial bridge, collecting tolls to fund its repair. To walk across a sturdy, well-maintained stone bridge, to feel its solidness underfoot after miles of treacherous fords, was to experience the comfort of order and civic responsibility. Even the simple wagon saw improvements, like the crucial introduction of the pivoted front axle, which allowed a four-wheeled cart to turn much more easily, a small change that made a huge difference to the flow of goods over land. For the traveler, guidebooks began to appear, evolving from the simple itineraries of Matthew Paris into more detailed texts for pilgrims, listing the major shrines, the best inns, and the tolls to be expected along a certain route. And within the inns themselves, a new and profound luxury began to appear, the private room. For the wealthy, merchant, or noble, the ability to rent a room with its own bed, and perhaps even its own fireplace and a door with a lock, was a revolutionary development. It offered a level of privacy, security, and comfort that was unimaginable in the communal dormitories of the past. The smell of fresh straw in a well-kept stable, the relative quiet of a private chamber, these were the signs of a world where travel was slowly becoming less of an ordeal and more of a manageable, predictable undertaking. With better inns and more organized trade came a greater need for security. The law, which had often stopped at the edge of the forest, slowly began to extend its reach down the long and lonely roads. The medieval world was a patchwork of overlapping jurisdictions. The authority of a king often faded the further one traveled from his court. But as kingdoms grew more powerful and centralized, they began to assert their authority over the arteries of travel. A legal concept known as the King's Peace, or Pax Regis, came into being. This declared that certain major highways were under the direct protection of the crown. To commit a crime on the king's highway was not just an offense against the victim. It was a direct affront to the king himself, and it would be punished with royal severity. The sight of a royal standard flying over a castle or a town gate was a reassuring sign that you were entering a space where the law had meaning. Specific laws were enacted to make this peace a reality. In England, the Statute of Winchester, passed in 1285, was a comprehensive attempt to impose order. It commanded that all highways between market towns be cleared of bushes, trees, and ditches for 200 feet on either side. This was a purely practical measure, designed to eliminate the places where robbers could lie in ambush. The statute also formalized the system of the town watch and required all men to keep arms in their house to participate in the hue and cry, the collective pursuit of a criminal. Religious institutions also played a vital role in protecting travelers. The great military orders, the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, were founded to protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads to the Holy Land. These orders built impressive fortresses at key strategic points and patrolled the routes, offering a powerful shield against bandits. Their network of commanderies and safe houses extended back into Europe, creating a chain of secure havens along the major pilgrimage routes. The Church also wielded its most powerful spiritual weapon, the threat of excommunication, to attack a pilgrim on their holy journey or a cleric on church business was a grave sin that could result in being cast out of the community of the faithful, a fate that was, for the medieval mind, more terrifying than death. For the individual traveler of high status, the most valuable possession could be a letter of safe conduct. This was an official document, issued by a king or a powerful noble, bearing their heavy wax seal. It commanded all subjects to allow the bearer safe passage and to offer them aid. To harm the bearer of such a letter was to directly disobey a royal command, and the consequences would be severe. Still, enforcement remained a constant struggle. The law was only as strong as the local lord's willingness to enforce it. But new methods of encouragement were devised. The system of collective punishment held an entire community responsible for crimes that occurred in their vicinity. If a merchant was robbed on the road passing through a village's lands, and the villagers did not find and turn over the culprit, the entire village could be hit with a heavy fine. This provided a powerful incentive for local communities to police their own roads and to not turn a blind eye to the activities of local bandits. Slowly, steadily, the old ways of private justice, of the blood feud between families, began to give way to a more centralized system of royal justice. Special courts were even established to deal with the unique problems of travelers. Courts that could dispense justice to foreigners and adjudicate disputes that happened outside the clear jurisdiction of a single town. Traveling on a road known to be patrolled and protected, feeling the security that comes from the rule of law, was a new and deeply reassuring experience. The world was still a dangerous place, but the shadows were slowly, unevenly beginning to recede. These changes in maps, in inns, in laws, were slow and incremental, taking place over centuries. They were the gentle currents that would eventually carry the medieval world into a new era. The world of our traveler, the world of the lonely road and the sacred shrine, did not end on a specific date. It faded slowly, like a dream upon waking, a series of profound shifts over a long period of time. gradually brought the medieval era of travel to a peaceful close. The Black Death in the mid-14th century was a cataclysm that tore the fabric of the old society. In its devastating wake, the survivors found themselves in a new world. Labor was scarce, and peasants found they could demand greater freedom and higher wages. Many left the manors they had been tied to for generations, setting out on the roads not for God, but for a better life. This new mobility began to dissolve the static, localized world of feudalism. At the same time, powerful, centralized monarchies were consolidating their control. Kings in France, England, and Spain subdued the fractious nobility and began to build the foundations of modern nation-states. With a single, strong authority, it became easier to enforce a single set of laws, to collect national taxes, and to begin thinking about infrastructure, like roads, on a national scale. The journey of 1,000 miles was no longer a journey through a dozen petty kingdoms, but through one single, overarching realm. Then came a technological revolution, the invention of the printing press. Suddenly, knowledge could be replicated cheaply and accurately. Maps, once rare, hand-drawn treasures, could be printed by the hundreds. Guidebooks and itineraries could be made accessible to a much wider audience. The sound of the printing press, the rhythmic clatter that created identical copies of a map, was the sound of a world being made more legible, more knowable. The great spiritual currents of the age were also shifting. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century challenged the very idea of pilgrimage and the veneration of relics. In the Protestant lands of Northern Europe, the great shrines fell into disuse. The primary religious motivation that had sent millions of people out on the roads for centuries began to fade. And as people began to look away from the ancient shrines, they began to look outward toward the vast unknown oceans. The age of discovery, powered by new technologies in shipbuilding like the sturdy caravel, and new navigational tools like the astrolabe, shifted Europe's focus from the old terrestrial routes to new oceanic ones. The imagined scent of sea salt and tar, the call of uncharted waters, became more compelling than the dusty road to Canterbury or Rome. The world was growing larger, its horizons expanding far beyond the edges of the old Mappa Mundi. Back on the land, the very landscape was changing. The slow enclosure of common lands, the fencing of fields, created a more ordered, more private countryside. The old, ambiguous pathways gave way to more clearly defined roads. The sight of a landscape becoming more ordered, with fences and clear routes, was the sight of the modern world being born. The medieval experience of travel became a thing of folklore, a story of heroic pilgrims and chivalrous knights. And yet its legacy endures. Many of our modern highways still follow the straight, logical paths first laid down by Roman legions and later trod by the ceaseless feet of medieval pilgrims. The road is a living thing, and it holds the memory of all who have passed along it. Our traveler, the pilgrim, the merchant, the messenger, has long since vanished. We can see them now only as a final, fading image, a lone figure walking into the mists of history. Their world is gone, but their journey, the timeless human act of setting out into the unknown in search of something more, remains. The story is over. The quiet turning of a page in a history book. The story of the road seems to have found its end. Our traveler is home, a part of the quiet history of their village. The great historical currents have flowed on, carrying the medieval world into the gentle mists of memory. But our own journey tonight need not end here. As the mind begins to soften, to drift into the peaceful state before sleep, we can allow our thoughts to wander down other, quieter paths. Let us drift away from the land and out onto the dark, soothing waters of the medieval sea. For those who sought to cross a channel or a sea, or even an ocean, a different kind of journey awaited, one that traded the tyranny of the road for the profound and unpredictable mystery of the water. Imagine, for a moment, a medieval ship. In the north, it is likely a cog, a sturdy tub-like vessel with high, curving sides. It is built with a technique called clinker construction, its wooden planks overlapping like the scales of a fish. It has a single tall mast, and from it hangs one enormous square sail. In the calmer waters of the Mediterranean, one might instead find a galley, long and slender, propelled by the rhythmic pull of oars as much as by the wind. Whichever the vessel, the experience of being on board is one of utter and complete crowdedness. The distinction between passengers, crew, and cargo is a fluid one. People found a place to rest wherever they could, on coils of rope, on wooden chests, or on the open deck itself. They were joined by livestock chickens in cages, sheep, even horses, all being transported from one port to another. The ship was a wooden microcosm, a whole world of life packed into a small, floating space. There was no shelter from the elements. The deck was open to the sky. When the sun beat down, there was little shade to be found. When it rained, everyone was soaked. At night, a profound damp and cold would settle over the ship, seeping into woolen cloaks and blankets. The feeling of the deck rising and falling on the endless swell of the sea was a constant companion. For many, it was a recipe for relentless seasickness. Navigation was an art of faith and careful observation. A sailor would have a lodestone, a piece of naturally magnetized iron, which they could float in a bowl of water to find the direction of north. They would steer by the sun during the day and by the familiar patterns of the stars at night. The sight of a star-filled sky over a dark, open ocean with no other light in the entire world Because of these uncertainties, to sail out into the open ocean, into the mare incognitum, was an act of supreme courage or desperation. The greatest fear was a storm. A ship with a single square sail was clumsy, unable to sail effectively against the wind. In a gale, the sail would be furled, and the ship would be at the mercy of the waves. Its fate in the hands of God and the intercession of the sailors' patron saints, like Saint Nicholas. The diet at sea was a monotonous trial: rock-hard biscuit, salted fish that would make you thirstier with every bite, and water stored in wooden barrels that would quickly grow foul and slimy. And yet there was a unique world on that ship. The sounds were a hypnotic symphony, the endless, rhythmic sound of waves against the wooden hull, a constant, soothing rush. The creaking and groaning of the ship's timbers, a sound like a living creature breathing and sighing around you. The smell was of wet rope and the sharp, clean scent of tar used to seal the planks. The taste of salt spray was always on the lips. To survive, the people on board had to form a community, sharing stories and duties, their lives bound together by the wooden walls of the ship and the vast, unpredictable water around them. Shipwreck was a constant, terrifying possibility, a reminder that they were small and fragile in the face of nature's power. The endless rhythm of the sea carrying you on a slow, dark, peaceful voyage. From the wooden world of the ship, our thoughts drift to the remarkable individuals who undertook these incredible journeys, wandering not just for a season, but for a lifetime. Let your mind settle on a quiet, dreamlike image: a man on a camel, a long line of them, etched against the golden dunes of a vast desert. This could be a man like Ibn Battuta, a scholar from Morocco. He left his home in the 14th century, intending only to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, but he did not stop. For 30 years, his journey unfolded. He was driven by a deep curiosity, a desire to see the entire world of Islam. His path took him across North Africa, through the Middle East, down the coast of East Africa. He journeyed to India and then onward to China. He traveled over 75,000 miles, a distance unparalleled in his time. He was not a merchant or a conqueror. He was an observer. And when he finally returned home, an old man, he dictated his story, his rilla, his journey, a calm and detailed account of a world far beyond the imagination of his contemporaries. Or perhaps our thoughts drift to a bustling market in the great city of Samarkand. He crossed mountains and deserts and finally arrived at the magnificent court of Kublai Khan, the Emperor of China. The wonders he saw there were like things from a dream. He saw people using Blackstone's coal for fuel. He saw them using paper for money. He saw a vast, sophisticated empire whose splendors he carefully noted, and his account, The Travels of Marco Polo, became a window for Europe, a glimpse into a world of unbelievable wealth and sophistication. Not all great wanderers were men. Imagine an Englishwoman of the 15th century, Marjorie Kemp. She was a mystic, a wife, and a mother, driven by an intense and passionate faith. Her journeys were pilgrimages, but she undertook them with a fierce determination that was extraordinary. She went to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Her journeys were not just across land and sea. They were journeys deep within her own soul. And her story, one of the first autobiographies written in English, gives us a rare and intimate look at the inner life of a medieval woman. These are just a few. There was Egeria, a woman from the late Roman world, who wrote a wonderfully detailed account of her pilgrimage to the holy sites of the East in the 4th century. There was Benjamin of Tudela, a Jewish traveler from Spain, who journeyed through the Middle East in the 12th century not to see wonders. These great wanderers were possessed of a quiet courage, a deep and abiding curiosity about the world. They faced immense challenges, not just of terrain and weather, but of culture and communication. Their accounts, sometimes embellished, sometimes misunderstood, were like threads of light, slowly illuminating the dark spaces on the map. Let your mind drift with them now, across the silent desert, through the bustling city, on a long and peaceful journey into a world of wonder. These real journeys inspired countless imagined ones. For in the medieval mind, travel was not just a physical act, but a powerful metaphor for life itself, a symbolic path that everyone must walk. Let your thoughts settle now in a quiet, dark room. Imagine the flickering candlelight by which a person might read or listen to one of the great tales of a symbolic journey. The language is rhythmic, poetic, and soothing. The story is not about a real place, but about the landscape of the soul. Think of Dante, the great Italian poet. His Divine Comedy is perhaps the ultimate spiritual journey. He travels through the dark wood of error, and then descends, circle by circle, through the depths of hell. He then begins the slow, arduous climb up the mountain of purgatory, and finally he ascends through the celestial spheres of paradise. It is an epic voyage, but its true landscape is the human heart, its path, a journey from sin through penance to salvation. Or think of Chaucer's Pilgrims gathered at the Tabard Inn. Their physical journey to Canterbury is real enough, but it is also a framework for a journey through society itself. The knight, the miller, the prioress, the wife of Bath. All of humanity is there, on the road together, each telling their own story, each walking their own path, but all moving in the same direction. The pilgrimage is the excuse for the exploration of life. This idea was at the very core of medieval belief. Life itself was seen as a pilgrimage. We are all just travelers, sojourners, passing through this earthly world. Our true home is in the celestial kingdom. The world is the road, full of temptations and dangers. The choices we make, the virtues we practice, the sins we commit, these are the steps we take on our journey toward our final destination. This idea found expression in art as well. In the late Middle Ages, a powerful image known as the danse macabre, the dance of death, appeared in churches and manuscripts. It is not a frightening image, but a meditative one. A skeletal figure, Death, gently leads a long procession of people. In the line is a king in his crown, a pope in his finery, a merchant with his coins, and a poor peasant with his plough. Death takes them all by the hand. It is the final, universal journey that no one can refuse. It is a reminder that in the end, all are equal. All are simply travelers on the same path. In morality plays, performed in town squares, this allegory was brought to life. In the famous play Everyman, the main character is summoned by death to undertake a final journey to his reckoning. He asks his friends, fellowship, kindred, goods to come with him, but they all abandon him. Only his good deeds, weak at first, is able to accompany him to the end. And even for those who could not undertake a great physical pilgrimage, a symbolic one was always possible. On the stone floors of great cathedrals, like Chartres in France, you could find a labyrinth, a single winding path laid out in intricate patterns. A person could walk this path slowly and meditatively, or they could simply trace it with a finger. It was a journey to the center and back again, a pilgrimage in miniature, a quiet, winding path for the journey of the soul, leading you gently, peacefully toward a calm and quiet center. And even today, the echoes of these ancient paths can still be found, walked by modern pilgrims seeking a connection to this long-ago world, a quiet space for their own journey. The ancient roads are still there, buried under tarmac or transformed into quiet country lanes or preserved as hiking trails, and some of them are still walked. The most famous of all is the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James, in Spain. Each year, hundreds of thousands of people still set out to walk the same routes that pilgrims have walked for over 1,000 years. The reasons are many. Some walk for faith, some for adventure, some walk to find quiet, to heal from a loss, or to mark a transition in their lives. They carry a modern pack, but they also carry a scallop shell, the same symbol a medieval pilgrim would have used. They do not have to worry about bandits in the same way, but they still feel the ache in their muscles, the sun on their backs. They stay in simple hostels called albergues, sleeping in communal rooms, sharing meals and stories with strangers from all over the world. They follow simple, yellow arrows painted on trees and stones that mark the way. The sound is one of peace, the gentle sound of footsteps on a gravel path, the whisper of the wind in the trees. the quiet camaraderie of fellow walkers. To walk these paths is to deliberately step into a slower rhythm. It is to measure a day not in hours and minutes, but in the distance your own 2 feet can carry you. It is to realize that the journey is not just about reaching the destination, but about every single step along the way. Every step taken today on the Camino or on the Via Francigena to Rome is a step on ground made sacred by the millions of steps that have come before. It is a connection to a deep and timeless human impulse, the need to move, to seek, to discover, and to find peace in the simple act of walking. And so, as our story comes to its final, gentle close, perhaps you can feel that sense of a long journey ending, the feeling of peace that comes after a long walk, the feeling of letting go. The ancient roads are quiet now, covered by time, but they are still there, waiting in the deep sleep of history. And so you too can rest. Let your journey end for the night. Let the path fade into dream and sleep deeply and peacefully.